Welcome on into Forward Progress presented by the Hammer Betting Network. I am Eric Ploy from the Gold Sheet, joined by TA of CleveAnalytics.com, professional sports bettor Suma, as well as professional sports bettor Hitman. Now, we just got some huge news out of the NFL, so we're going to get right into that. But before we get into the discussion of the Stephon Diggs trade to the Houston Texans, I want to remind everybody that it's very important to like, subscribe, and share this video to help us grow. Comments will be read in real time, so you have to be subscribed to comments, so make sure you do that. We'll get to your comments in real time. And also a major shout out to Pinnacle Sportsbook, the world's sharpest sportsbook, offering competitive odds for 25 years. We preach line shopping on this channel, and with everyday competitive odds, Pinnacle should be one of your available outs. If you want to support the show even further, when you sign up to Pinnacle, use code HAMMER. Pinnacle is your trusted sportsbook for 25 years. Bet smart, bet Pinnacle. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. Please play responsibly, and it is not available in the U.S. Now, gentlemen, let's get right into it. Stephon Diggs to the Houston Texans is a 2025 second-round pick going to Buffalo. That's a pick that they got from Minnesota. And the Bills are giving the Texans a fifth-rounder in 2025, a sixth-rounder in 2025, and, of course, the man, Stephon Diggs. Now, there are three kind of implications from this trade, so I'm going to lay them all out, and which one of you want to get into it first. But the first question I want to ask is, where do the Texans now rank in the AFC with this addition of Stephon Diggs? Number two is, how does this impact the Texans' cap moving forward? And number three, I know they still have Josh Allen, but is the Buffalo Bills window officially closed? Whichever one of you guys want to get started, let's hop right in.
I'll get started. With my first thought for Buffalo was that I might end up being interested in some Buffalo prices if there is an overreaction to this trade. I know everybody is right now posting Buffalo's wide receiver depth chart, which, I mean, let's be honest, it's not good. But they're either going to end up drafting one or two guys in what's going to be a potentially historically deep wide receiver class. You never know. There could be maybe a trade on the horizon. I know TA posted something about maybe a Brandon Ayuk trade, maybe a T. Higgins trade could be on the horizon. A long shot, but a possibility. But, as long as Buffalo has Josh Allen at quarterback, the quote that Joe Burrow gave about the Bengals window, and he was like, the window is my entire career. That's kind of how I feel about Josh Allen. In my opinion, he's the second best quarterback in the NFL. There is concerns with the other teams in the division. We'll just dismiss New England. They're going to be really bad this year. We probably all agree on that. But the Jets, there's definitely an upside with the Jets, but there's definitely a very low floor with the Jets as well. And kind of feel the same way about Miami. Like there is an upside with them with the explosiveness they have on offense. But Tua still, in my opinion, isn't the most durable quarterback. They have the guys that they lost on defense. The offensive line is still a big concern for them. So my first reaction was maybe taking advantage of betting Buffalo at some point if there was an overreaction to this. I mean, Stephon Diggs, it's a loss to lose him. But remember, this is a guy that's entering his age 31 season. Last year, in the back half of the season, he had 1.43 yards per route run. We got to see Buffalo's offense was pretty functional with him playing in a little bit more of a reduced role, and they were highlighting James Cook and Dalton Kincaid more. So that was my first reaction from the Buffalo side. And from the Houston side, yeah, I think all of us were kind of high on Houston this year. We thought that they were positioned to take a jump, and it doesn't change my opinion on that. This is a top 3, 4, 5 at worst team in the AFC that's going to be they're going to be up there in the end, in the divisional round, possibly conference championship. It's a really good roster, and they're taking advantage of C.J. Stroud's rookie contract well.
Now to piggyback on that quickly, though, the same way that you're looking to maybe support Buffalo if the market overreacts, is it also twofold where the market might overreact to how good Houston is, or at this point, the Texans are simply just a contender and they just need to go out and prove it again because they are maximizing C.J. Stroud's rookie year and, of course, coming off a great season last year. Is it possible the market overreacts the other way and gives Houston too much love where maybe there should be a little bit of a buyback on the Texans?
Yeah, I think that Houston's really good. I mean, I had them kind of neck and neck with Baltimore a few weeks ago when I was on, before the trade. I actually, think that, Buffalo made a really smart move here. I don't care about the draft compensation. They're going to take a major dead cap hit, like $30 million this year. That's fine. They save on, going forward on this contract. I mean, Diggs is 31, looked completely cooked, as Hitman mentioned at the end of the last year. Is a problem in the locker room. And, who knows? It's one of those things where sometimes you take a guy out of, maybe he was demanding targets and they're inefficient targets. So you kind of get that equation out of there and you get guys like Khalil Shakir. He's not a number one receiver. And I do think they're going to add more in the draft. They could, there's a guy like DJ Chark you might be able to get on a 1-year deal who isn't the worst player in the world, gives you a little bit of size outside. And Moose Shakir, more inside, like he's more suited. But it might make the targets a little bit more efficient when you're not force feeding a guy who's just, not playing well, like a guy like Diggs. So I do think it's perfectly fine. You've got a guy in Josh Allen who's, going to be with the team, for another 5-10 years at least. So you've got Brandon Beane, a GM who's got staying power. He's not going to be fired anytime soon. So you can afford to take a 1-year quote, unquote reset. I still think they're going to be good. I still think they'll be favored to make the playoffs, especially when you've got a top 5 level quarterback like this. They still have a really good, defense. They didn't lose anybody outside of Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde amongst their starters from last year. So it's still going to be a top 12-ish defense. Still have James Cook. You got a decent offensive line. Like I said, you can add, a veteran in the free agent market. There's a Tyler Boyd, TJ Shark. Like those type of guys are fine. Draft somebody and you're going to be fine. Like, I don't think that this is necessarily, their Super Bowl window is closing or anything like that. It's just kind of a 1-year reset. Next year, they'll be able to reload a little bit more. So I think this is a great move for Buffalo. I think that, it doesn't look like, just early read, that the betting markets are too negative on Buffalo. I think there's tied for third still in the AFC from what I can gather. So I don't think there's an overreaction yet there. I think with Houston, again, you get CJ Stroud on a rookie deal, a guy who's like 99% sure of being a really, really good quarterback. There's no questions there. He's one of the best rookie seasons of all time amongst quarterbacks. And you just, supply him with as many weapons as possible. Even if Diggs is a bit overrated now and not a number one, you still got Nico Collins and Tank Dell there. He doesn't have to be the number one guy to get all, doesn't need 100 targets anymore. So it's definitely a move that was worth it for them. And, they've got other guys, Will Anderson, namely Tank Dell, like guys that are still in the same rookie contract length as Stroud. So you've got multiple years here with your core on these cheap deals. So you can afford to take chances like this, even if, Diggs is only going to be around for, maybe 2 years, 3 years. Nico Collins is actually going to be a free agent at the end of this year. So if Diggs does still have some juice left, you can afford to let Collins walk if you really need to. So, it gives them a little bit more flexibility, but this is a really good team, really good roster. They're going to face a much tougher schedule this year. I'll say that. So you mean look at the end of the year. They face Dallas on the road, at home against Baltimore, and at Kansas City to end the season. So it's a tougher schedule. So from a win total perspective, I have to evaluate a little bit more. But from a, just getting in the playoffs, I think they'll have a shot just because of that quarterback and the rest of this roster.
Yeah, really good Houston Texans team now. And the Buffalo Bills, like you said, as long as Josh Allen is there, that window cannot be fully closed. But so any final thoughts on the Diggs to Houston deal?
Pretty much agree with everything. I think that this trade helps Houston more than it hurts Buffalo. I'm close to zero concern about Buffalo going forward. Like the guy said, 31-year wide receiver who was obviously some kind of an issue last year, looked pretty much cooked as a wide receiver 1, and now going to Houston, he will basically be the wide receiver 3 on the depth chart. So Houston, I completely agree. I think we can make the case that they are top 3 team in the AFC with their roster top to bottom. There are not many holes, like only a few depth holes, like defensive tackle, cornerback 2. But overall, this is a pretty good roster, stacked on offense, decent offensive line. quarterback who's probably going to be good for a long time. So I really like this trade for Houston, and Buffalo will probably go like double tap or even 3 times wide receiver in this draft.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. The Buffalo Bills should have some options to draft. And like the guys mentioned, there is opportunity for Buffalo to really kind of recoup what they lost in Stephon Diggs, because toward the end of the season, the argument could be made that they didn't really lose all that much with the way that he was playing. But maybe he'll be more revitalized, happy to be in a dome in Houston, Texas, rather than in the cold of Western New York and Buffalo. But let's switch over to another AFC team, and Hassan Reddick going to the Jets in a trade. Now, the Jets let Bryce Huff walk earlier this season, and now the Jets are adding Reddick. I'm sure they're going to try to extend him as well. Kind of a little bit of an odd move in the sense where they let Huff walk, yet they're keened in on Reddick. It was kind of like a flip right there between these two teams. But the thing with the New York Jets right now is, of course, they're looking at their team saying, we're going all in. Now they obviously have Aaron Rodgers. They go and get Tyron Smith. Now they're adding Hassan Reddick to their pass rush. But at this point, you're talking about the season hinging on 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. Is this team, well, barring no injuries, so injuries weren't a thing, you could make the case that this is one of the best things of the AFC on paper. I don't think anyone would disagree. But at this point, you're asking for so much from Rodgers and for the rest of this kind of aging team that's really looking to win this year and maybe next year, and that's about it. Sum, I know you're the Jets fan here, so I'll go to you. What are your thoughts on this move, and what are your thoughts on the Jets' ability to really be a player this season? Is it really all on Rodgers and the injury? And if so, is that a recipe for success?
Yeah, short term, I like this move. Midterm, long term, I would have preferred if they just would have stuck to Bryce Huff, go with a younger guy who has kind of the same profile and still has some more potential untapped, in my opinion. But they let him go, sign Hassan Reddick. Good move for the short-term window, and this team is completely all in. Like, I cannot remember a more fragile all-in team going into one season. Like, you named it, 41-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles injury. Like, they did a very decent job this offseason, in my opinion. Like, keeping the defense intact. I think defense easily top 5, top 3. Defense from a personal standpoint, top to bottom. Defense is volatile, so they should have at least a top 12, top 15 defense next season, unless they get completely riddled with injuries. On offense, they fixed their offensive line, but the problem is that like 3 guys are either north of 33 years old and coming off injury. Like Elijah Vera-Tucker had 2 season-ending injuries. Tyron Smith has not played, I think, more than 10 games in a season since 2016. Morgan Moses is 33 years old. Mike Williams might be ready for week 1. We don't know. They will likely go wide receiver or tight end early in the draft to add more juice to that skill position group. So if everyone stays healthy, they have a huge range of outcomes. They can easily go deep in the AFC, but we are really talking about Aaron Rodgers, who is coming off an Achilles injury. We don't know whether he is even remotely close to his last Green Bay level of play, which declined a little bit after his last MVP season. Mike Williams could be a toast season coming off the ACL. So lots of unknowns. Like Hitman has said, very low floor, high ceiling, but man, this is really betting on health, going all in on health. Usually not the greatest thing to base your season on, but they have no other choice. And I can also not fault them for like any all-in move right now, because this coaching staff and the GM, they will not be there if this season doesn't end in at least one playoff win. So pretty much cannot fault them for anything, for any of these moves.
Yeah, push the chips all in the middle of the table. TA or Hitman, what are your thoughts on the New York Jets outlook this season?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Suma said. The formula, investing on, kind of all in, pushing all in with older vets who are, coming off injuries or often injured, it is a recipe for disaster. But once you make that decision to roll the dice with Rodgers, you kind of have to move all in and do these things. I mean, the Mike Williams move I thought was very reasonable. I think that that contract and just, the quality of player, yeah, he's a risk, but for the need and for what they paid, I thought that was fine. Tyron Smith and Moses, those are fine. Like I said, I want to see what they do in the draft. If they can really add depth to the offensive line, then I'll feel a lot better. Like if they can draft a tackle, and this is a very good tackle draft, if they, instead of wasting, I don't know to call it wasting, but instead of using a pick on a guy like Brock Bowers at tight end, right? Which I've seen a lot of mocks put him there, fortifying that offensive line. So in case of Tyron Smith is not able to make it through the year, you've got, a young guy ready to go. And plus next year, if you look at their cap situation, Moses is not under contract. I think Tyron Smith might have an option. So you need younger guys there anyway. I would feel a lot better if they were to continue to build up the offensive line in the draft. And then maybe, grab another receiver. I don't think they have to do much on defense at this point. They're pretty loaded there. It makes the last year's draft like so befuddling. I'm sure Suma agrees. I mean, the Will McDonald pick was just mind blowing at the time. It was a 24-year-old edge rusher on a team that already had, was loaded at that position, had drafted Jermaine Johnson, another older edge rusher the year before. They had Bryce Huff, who was very efficient in his limited snaps, and they decided to draft McDonald instead of build up the offensive line and wide receiving core. I really didn't understand that. And that kind of domino effect, has come into play this year, where now they have to draft an offensive lineman to build that depth or a wide receiver because they didn't do it last year. And so in that perspective, very fragile. I can't imagine a guy like Rodgers coming off that torn Achilles and again, with a new team and essentially a new system. I know it's Hackett's system, but still, new teammates, just coming out of the gates and becoming a top 10 quarterback again. I just don't see it. I mean, even if you look back to Tom Brady when he started with the Bucs, if you remember that opening game, he had multiple interceptions. Everyone was saying that he was cooked. It was a bad move, and he should have stayed in New England. And even the first half of the year, he really, he was struggling. He didn't turn things on until after the bye week. And so, and historically, we've just seen these quarterbacks, even Russell Wilson, obviously coming from Seattle. He struggled in Denver. Like, it's not easy for these guys who've been in one system forever. Matt Ryan a few years ago too, to all of a sudden go to a new team and new surroundings and end up being a top 10 quarterback right off the gate. So they're going to have to survive that. And so I don't suspect he'll be anything more than just an above average quarterback kind of at best, but they've got the defense and they've got enough around him, I think, to be a potential playoff team. So yeah, it is what it is, but I want to see what they do in the draft. And I think they should really focus on that offensive line in the draft and receiving core and not be satisfied with these older vets who are injured.
Certainly agree. Hitman, final thoughts on the Jets and their outlook this season?
If you're looking to bet on Jets related things this season, I would, if I was pro Jets, I would look on some bigger payout stuff, division stuff, conference stuff, wait for alternate regular season wins to open and take some maybe 11 plus wins, 12 plus wins at plus money. Because if it does hit and like these guys stay healthy, there's so many ifs with them. If they stay healthy, if Rodgers is the same guy, if they can overcome the worst play caller in the league because Rodgers is so good, then they're going to win 11, 12 games possibly. But if you're on the other side and you think this is going to be a disaster, these guys aren't going to stay healthy, it could get ugly. It could be a 7-6 win team again. So if I'm looking at bet Jets related things, I'm waiting for some more. I'm going to embrace the variance with this team.
Yeah, and as somebody who lives in New York City, has a bunch of friends who are Jets fans, I tell them all the time that there's just this is a 8-9 team. If nobody stays healthy, they obviously disagree. They think they win the Super Bowl. We shall see based on what they've done. And I think they kind of put themselves in a little bit of a tough position where right now, like, they're going to probably want to go after like a Brock Bowers based on considering they're, again, pushing all the chips in the middle. But the reality of the situation is the best thing for the franchise, probably even now and certainly for the future, is to get themselves an offensive lineman. So we'll see if Joe Douglas, who gets all the love from all the New York sports fans, despite having a terrible record as being the GM, ends up, making the probable right decision in this one. But it's time to talk some NFL draft. Of course, the draft is at the end of this month. Before we get into it, need to plug the mock draft series going on the Hammer Betting Network. It is called the On the Clock series with Rob Pizzola, and he's running through all 32 NFL teams doing a mock draft for the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. A couple of those are already up on the channel, so make sure you check them out. And then stay tuned. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on seeing your favorite teams having a mock draft done by Rob Pizzola and sometimes some guests. That's the On the Clock series. But let's talk some NFL draft. Now, there are obviously a lot of different things going on in terms of the odds, line movements. You have the speculation about what's going on at number 2. If the Washington Commanders are going Jaden Daniels, Drake May, if the Minnesota Vikings are going to trade up, how many quarterbacks are going to go in the first round? Is J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix Jr., and Bo Nix, are they really first-round picks, or is there some steam a la Will Levis just a year ago? So there's a bunch of questions I can ask about the draft to you guys, but I guess the first questions is for starters, who in the mock draft / just, I guess, media personality realm are you looking at to see who has more like the accurate rankings? Number 2 would be any clues you can find from some odds movements as we're getting closer to the draft with pro days, being completed, the combine, of course, and also probably more up your alley, TA. What are some different data points that you can use, maybe based on GM draft histories with RAS scores or other certain things that are very useful to betting the NFL draft, which is, of course, odds are up, and it's happening at the end of this month?
Yeah, I would just say, I know these guys could step in, but from a draft analyst perspective, looking back historically, there's certain guys like Daniel Jeremiah, who is one that I follow closely. I think he's been pretty good with his intel. He's got connections, he used to be a scout in the league. So he's got connections with teams like the Ravens, I think the Jets as well. Those are a couple of teams that usually pay most attention with a guy like Jeremiah when he mocks those teams. Even if it's not the player itself, it's position grouping, I think, is interesting. So again, nothing is 100% foolproof, but he's one guy that with those specific teams that I tend to pay close attention to. And then a guy like Peter Schrager, who's had really close personal connections with a lot of the NFC West coaches. Now, not as much with Arizona or Seattle right now, but with McVay and Shanahan, he does those off-season podcasts with those guys. So, I like to see what he is mocking for those teams. So, there's others. I mean, Lance Zierlein with Houston typically, although last year he didn't get the Stroud thing right, but he's usually historically pretty good with those connections. So, there are obviously Houston doesn't have a first-round pick this year, but you try to find those reporters nationally that do have those personal connections with some of those teams. And then, like you said, some of the pay attention to what the GMs do historically, because it's not a perfect picture, but as we get more of these younger GMs who are more analytically focused, guys are drafting more premium positions than ever. They're drafting younger, they're drafting more athletic players, all those sorts of things. Some care about those things, others don't. I mean, John Schneider, for example, in Seattle, historically has not really cared about a lot of those things early in the draft. Whereas a guy like Mickey Loomis only drafts guys who are, very athletic players. And so, I've got that on my site. You could take a look. Just these are data points. Again, nothing's foolproof, but it can get a tendency as to the types of qualities and traits that some of these GMs prefer early in the draft, and so it makes kind of examining the potential options at their selections a little bit easier. So those are just a couple of things that I like to look at when looking at potentially mock drafts and maybe picking draft positions and those sorts of things.
Makes a ton of sense. Sumer, Hitman, any data points that you found to be useful, and also kind of how are you deciphering some of the noise of the draft season? Tia just mentioned a couple of guys who are relatively solid with their intel, and then the results follow suit. But there are also times that there's steam. Again, like we said, Will Levis last year, a lot of noise now for the number 2 and 3 picks for this year. Talk to me, either one of you two. What are you kind of focusing on, and what are you completely shuttering out when going through and making some bets on the NFL draft?
I can start. Yeah, so right now I'm operating under the assumption that not that no one really knows anything significant right now. So what I do right now or these days in awaitement of more draft markets, hopefully to come out in the next 2 weeks or something. I think last year I made the first over-under bet around April 16th or something. So probably aiming for some over-unders to come out in 10 to 14 days, hopefully. But what I do right now is I look at like 25 to 30 mock drafts from guys that have had some decent information or decent mock ratings in years past. But my goal is not to paint a perfect picture, because like most of the stuff is noise. There's a lot of groupthink out there. Some guys are doing mock drafts for clickbait right now, like having some weird guys pretty high or pretty low or something. I'm pretty much interested in ranges for certain players where I can expect them going forward. I can create like over-under numbers for stuff like offensive players, wide receivers round 1, D-liners round 1, conference, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, which gives me a solid baseline to start. And then off of that, over the next 3 weeks, you can pick up some information, news, maybe try to connect some dots, do some game theory thoughts in your head, also mocking under certain scenarios. What happens if, for example, right now there's almost no mock draft that has a linebacker in there. Maybe there's going to be a linebacker sneaking late into the first round. That will change certain other correlated markets and stuff like that. But right now, we will also talk about the second overall market. I think that no one really knows anything. Leading up to the draft, there will be some guys like Jeremiah or Zierlein, maybe Schrager, who can pick up some inside information, some tidbits. We will see some team leaks. We will see certain guys all of a sudden steaming overnight before the draft, which usually means that there has been a team player league. But right now, it's just about getting a feel for certain ranges for these players.
And I'll say one thing real quick. I think last year we saw probably the worst, from a leak perspective and rumors and all those sorts of things. I think we saw the worst mock draft season of all time. Like again, maybe Suma and Hitman can speak on this as well, but a lot of things were wrong going into that draft, and I think some of that has to do with just the league and these teams being a lot more tight-lipped because of a rise in gambling and betting with the NFL and the draft. We saw it during COVID. That was like during the pandemic. Was 2021. That was like, or 2022 was those years were kind of easy money makers, and there are a lot of leaks. And I think that there has been kind of a mandate. What I've heard from one, from the certain contacts I have, that there is a specific kind of, hey, just be careful what you say out there. So I think we have to take some of this stuff with a grain of salt more than usual, because I think the league is kind of making sure that these teams are more tight-lipped than in the past.
So that actually brings up another great question that I was thinking about, that one of you three may know the answer to, may not. So the same way, obviously, if you say like a Zerloin or a Jeremiah, like, yeah, they're giving their best guesses based on conversations. Obviously, these GMs are not telling them who they're picking to then put on their mock drafts. But are there any instances where agents are getting involved with some people who are writing mock drafts and trying to build some hype around their clients? Is that something to maybe seek out and try to avoid? Or is that something that, you can't really prove and not something that's building some steam? Because we see it all the time with some of these Schefter and Rappaport tweets. It's like, all right, that person's PR team definitely put that tweet together for that player. Is that something to consider when looking at mock drafts and other people to avoid? Or is that more speculation that we can't really confirm?
It's definitely a possibility. I'll just say in general, like I don't pay a ton of attention to mock drafts unless it's the final mock draft from a guy like Schrager or Jeremiah will have theirs a day before or the morning of. A lot of times you'll find your best stuff in those. These ones that are so far out, like you're just wasting your time, in my opinion, trying to link specific players to specific times a month out when these teams are far from certain what they're going to be doing. Now, like, I think you can use the mocks for like ranges. Like if Jeremiah, like Sumo was saying, like if Jeremiah, for example, has maybe 11 offensive linemen in his first round, and he talks about some of the guys that he mocked in like the 28, 30, 32 range, and maybe he wrote in the blurb saying this offensive lineman stock is skyrocketing or something, then you could start to get involved in stuff like over under 9.5 offensive linemen. Like stuff like that is maybe something that I would look for. But as far as like looking at mocks and like seeing like, this guy put JJ McCarthy to go third to New England or something, like it's just stuff that I don't pay much attention to at this point. And like to follow up on what Cleve said, also, like I've been very outspoken about this on Twitter that this year was the worst year for information. And it started in the draft, where last year's draft, I was getting sent, like I had my worst year as far as like people that normally give me really good stuff. Like it was more up and down than it ever was in the past. And that was followed up by this regular season. Like every single week there was beat writers that are normally very accurate, or there was major insiders for major networks that are normally very accurate that were completely off. And it felt like it was seemingly happening every week. And it started last year in the draft. So it would make logical sense that maybe there's been, with how big fantasy and draft betting and prop betting and all this stuff has gotten, that there's just tighter lips on this stuff right now. So yeah, that's kind of where I stand with draft. We're still this 3 weeks out.
And I'll say this with regards to the agent stuff. I think, one or, might get one or two reporters who are fed some stuff from agents, and that happens every year. But using, a tool like Grinding the Mocks, for example, that is a really good website that aggregates like over 2,000 mock drafts. That gives you a little bit better, kind of more wisdom of the crowd consensus ranking than it is one singular mock draft that maybe, an agent is controlling, with one specific guy. So, you can use some of that to kind of filter out maybe some of the noise that if there is agent speak there. But that's why, again, also looking at things like the draft visits. So each team can visit can have prospects, 30 prospects visit them. That's happening right now. That can give you a sense. It's not totally a specific, which player, it's kind of which position groups. Like you might have 30 prospects in, but 10 of them are, edge rushers or running backs or whatever. And it gives you a little more sense of the, usually teams don't use that as a camouflage. They actually use those real, for the most part, as real visits to get better insight into some of these players. So, and you can go back to prior seasons and look at which teams, you can look at, there's some teams that like out of the 30 prospects, they ended up drafting a handful of them. So it does happen a lot where that is a, kind of foretelling. So it's more about picking up on those type of, pre-draft nuggets. Again, using some of the what GMs have historically, some of the traits that they look at historically, kind of combining all those. It's a nice, it's like, trying to solve a puzzle here with some of this stuff. But you use all those little data points to kind of help you in whatever direction that you're looking for.
Yeah, and obviously this is not something that, unless you're getting literally the best information of the best, that you're gonna know for certain of what's gonna happen. But I feel like just from a logical perspective, it makes the most sense to kind of focus in on if this GM's been around for X amount of years and always dressed, or more likely than not dressed, X player with X, athletic score that he's visited, and also is somewhat of a need for that team. There are some situations where that kind of makes a lot of sense. And just to piggyback on what you were saying too, TA and Hitman, like as somebody who certainly has less sources than both of you guys, the last couple of years prior to last year used to be a time where the NFL draft was like a great bankroll builder. There was a lot of times where I felt as if even I could get down and have some information I read and be able to, not really even sweat betting the draft, but definitely seen a change from my perspective as well. the one last thing we want to discuss here, sticking on the draft, is now we talked about this 7 days ago, and Jaden Daniels was the favorite to go number 2 to Washington. 7 days later, Drake May is now the favorite to go number 2 to Washington. We talked about how last week there was probably some value betting May because it was so unclear what was going to happen that now you're getting a plus pricing. It's not a situation where you're going to be laying juice this early for something so unknown. We're just wondering if in these past 7 days, if anything has changed at any of your ends on who you think or have heard or have put together some tea leaves to think who's going to go second overall, if there's anything worth betting right now.
I personally also bet May at, I think, plus 115. Nothing really has changed. It's just that I listen even to more podcasts. I mean, this is selection bias because I can only talk about the guys that I listen to, but there's not a single person that I listen to when it comes to like draft intel or quarterback evaluation that has Jaden Daniels over Drake May. There's no one. Like everyone has Drake May over Jaden Daniels. And Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, does not have the profile that the NFL is very high on in 2024. I mean, Justin Fields got traded for a 6th round pick plus. Sam Howell got traded after two seasons in. Jaden Daniels, great with his legs, very slim build, 30% or whatever pressure to sack rate. I'm not buying the notion that NFL teams will take him over a guy like Drake May at second overall. I could be wrong. Then I will lose some bets. But right now, I'm just not seeing it with the Jaden Daniels over Drake May.
Taylor, any intel or any just general thoughts on the situation?
I just personally, when it comes to something like the second, third pick, like these early picks where you are going to be able to pinpoint a player to a team, where it differentiates from like the 28th pick, like not much information could get out about like who a team's going to take 28th, because it's like who's going to be available, and there's a lot of factors. But like with something like the second pick, I'm typically just waiting it out as long as possible to see what I hear, and I don't mind laying like a minus 300, minus 400 if I feel like at a later point I got really good information that I could trust. So like typically I don't like to jump the gun on that stuff. I'll just take a worse price, sometimes a way worse price, but my confidence level will be way higher, where in comparison, if I bet it 3-4 weeks out, for me at least, I feel like I'm almost guessing. Now, one time where that is fine is like if it's a big plus money payout or something, if you're embracing the variance of the draft or something like that, then and you can maybe even that it's going to steam in one direction, and you could even play back the other side like a Jaden Daniels and get a guaranteed profit or something. I'm not opposed to that. But with draft betting, I am not afraid just to wait stuff out and lay chalk if I feel like I have good information. So that's kind of where I stand on the second pick.
Yeah, you absolutely read my mind there. My next question was going to be like, do you want to wait? And then if you have somebody who comes in and says that even if the market moves drastically, like if you really trust that source, if it's worth laying, and there's our answer. Tia, are you on that same notion there, or do you have a different way of viewing?
We're just talking about the number 2 pick specifically. I mean, it flipped 2 days ago. Why did it flip? Because Brian Kelly, didn't he like by accident mention Washington and Jaden Daniel? Like, I don't know. Like sometimes you got to be careful when it's weeks out of draft bet, draft movement. Like the limits are really low. These things are reactionary more than, someone having inside info at this point. It's sometimes, like I said, it's a mock or it's something like that occurs where a coach drops a team's name. And so then all of a sudden, the odds flip. Like it's very reactionary. So you could take advantage of things that if you truly don't believe that's the case, and, go the other way. I personally have no idea. I mean, I don't know. You try to find connections that supposedly Adam Peters, the GM of Washington, is very tight-lipped. He learned that in San Francisco. I mean, look, we all thought that San Francisco was going to take Mac Jones a couple of years ago when they made that trade, and it turned out to be Trey Lance. So they did a really good job of keeping that, under. They were not. No one was scooping that really for the most part until maybe right before the draft. So I don't think you're going to know for sure until really, really close to the draft. And so I think everyone's just kind of guessing and just trying to find, any little thing that they can make a bet on. And like I said, that pro day with Jaden Daniels, I guess is the one that did that. So I personally am not playing in this unless I have really strong feeling, but I just don't right now.
Yeah, it makes sense why you don't, because we have tons of time until the draft and not everything is even close to finalize. I'm sure there are GMs sitting there that don't even know exactly what they're going to do. So obviously trying to make a bet. Limits are lower, but I think just what Hitman was saying earlier makes the most sense. Where if you're seeing the steam and it's something that you're buying in, play the chalk. Play the chalk if you really think that that's what's going to happen. But before that, before we sign off, any final tidbits or just betting advice for betting the draft outside what we discussed, or any things like, again, what Hitman just said, he gave a great nugget there. If you think the implied probability is off, even if it's chalky, lay the chalk. Any other final draft clues you use, or should we get back onto that next week? We can talk more when I'm sure we'll see some odds changing for different positional groups and different picks.
I'll say one more thing. One thing that people don't like to really look at is, they always pay attention to current needs with these teams when looking at early picks. And I think especially when you start getting to later in the first round, mid to late first round, with GMs who have been successful in the past or have staying power, take a look at what the 2025 roster looks like from a cap situation, because these better teams, they like to plan out multiple years in advance. And so if, you might have a team that has, a good offensive line now, but when you look at their, who's under contract next year, they might not have a tackle on the roster right now, right? Or, their cornerback situation is really thin, or whatever it is, because, maybe they're paying, maybe they have a quarterback who's, on a huge extension right now, and they really have to play that game carefully. So it's not necessarily current needs. Sometimes it's, how do we manage the roster going forward as well. So, take a quick look at some of the better teams in the league and what their cap situation is next year. And if there's any, from a roster allocation standpoint, from position wise, if there's anything lacking, pay attention to that. For example, I looked at the Ravens. Their offensive line is fine this year. They do have to replace a couple of guys, but next year they don't have a tackle on the roster besides Ronnie Stanley, who I think they can get it out of that contract. And he's getting older, long in the tooth. He's always injured. And so that might be a spot where, maybe tackle isn't a high priority for this year's team, but for going forward, they know they have to manage that. So they may take one a little bit higher than most expect. Things like that I think is important when you look at some of these clues.
That makes a ton of sense, unless you're the New York Jets, who are clearly drafting for the now. Teams are smart, and teams know what they need. They know their current financials, and they know that there's the point of the draft is obviously to get better than now, but also you're going to have to fill out this team, especially in that first round. You're probably looking for somebody who's going to be with you for ideally the next 5+ seasons. But again, you never know. But that's going to wrap it up for the Forward Progress Show for today. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel and share the content. Best way to help the channel grow. We'll be right back here, same time, same place next Wednesday. We'll be discussing more draft topics, any other news and notes that come from the NFL. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. On behalf of myself, Suma, TA, and Hitman, and of course the Hammer Betting Network, we'll see you guys next time.